And in terms of using incense, one practical thing is have the coals nice and hot. Because if they're not nice and hot, there's going to be no smoke. And that looks very silly. And you know there's a distinction between our Roman and our Anglo-Catholic brethren. In the Roman Church for years, and I think it's still pretty much true, they use so little incense that someone said it takes an act of faith to believe that it's happening. On the other hand, if any of you have been to any of the great Anglo-Catholic shrine churches, you know that there are clouds and clouds and clouds of incense. Too much of a good thing, perhaps. But, okay, and then you make the sign of the cross, and the words you say are, be blessed in honor of him, be blessed by him in whose honor you are to be burned. Some of you, of course, remember the words that the celebrant says to the deacon when he goes to read the gospel. May the Lord be in your heart and on your lips, that you may worthily and properly proclaim the holy gospel. Well, there was a high mass some years ago, and the celebrant got muddled. And he said to the deacon, as he asked the blessing, be blessed by him in whose honor you are to be burned. And what made it even funnier is that the priest in question then preached a very controversial sermon. But anyway, with a freestanding altar, you first of all, if you're on this side, 3 double swings to the crucifix. Because a double swing is just, it's almost a natural thing. The thing sort of goes back and forth like that. But for example, here, just as Father Michael did this morning, 3 double swings to the crucifix. And then you simply walk around the altar, censing as you go. It's very, very simple. One thing to be avoided, and this sometimes happens, is people will sidestep as they sense the altar. And this is, it doesn't work very well. It looks odd. Now, the altar against the east wall, if you look at you can watch what I do. It's 3 double swings to the crucifix. And you take your time, and then it goes here, 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 and circles this way, and then like this. It may seem complicated. Once you have done it a few times, it becomes sort of second nature. And bow each time, of course, you pass the cross. And then you hand it off to the thurifer, and if you do the censings of the people involved, the thurifer then does 3 doubles to the officiant or celebrant. And then if there's a group of acolytes, you cense them once in the middle, once to the left, once to the side, that side, that side. And then the thurifer can come down and cense the congregation once in the middle, once to the left, once to the right. Questions? Any questions? No questions, okay. But I hope that gives you some, yes.
Do you bring the incense all the way down the aisle as well?
No, the thurifer just stands really at the edge of the chancel, right here. And whenever a group of people is censed, you sense in the middle, to the left, to the right. Now, there's nothing theologically necessary about any of that. It's just conventional. It's a convention, it's a custom. And and there's sort of a hierarchy of censing the officiants. For example, if you have a solemn Eucharist, after the celebrant has censed the altar, he hands the thurible to the deacon, and the deacon does 3 double swings to the celebrant, and then he hands the censer to the subdeacon, who then censes the deacon. And then the subdeacon hands the thurible to the thurifer, who censes the acolytes in the congregation. if you look at that book, The Ceremonies of the Roman Rite Described, it's listed in there. I love the smell of incense. I really do. Yes, Father David.
We haven't used incense much. But really not. My sense has always been with these cabinets, at the altar, for example.
Yeah.
Is that the idea is to just try to get smoke on everything.
Yes.
Is that, so the idea is to just try to cover the full front, cover the top, cover the sides.
Yes, it has several levels of meaning. I mean, the altar itself is a symbol of Christ in his church. And so the incense offered to the altar is in honor of Christ. The altar is also the place where the prayers of God's people are offered to him. And the incensing of the altar suggests the incense of our prayers going up to God. And the reason for the censings of the various participants in the liturgy is to show that all of us are included in these prayers. There's also the fact it's an honorific in a way, because although we are fallen in sin and the image of God is only slowly being restored in us, still as human beings we have been made in the image and likeness of God. And so when the thurible is swung towards someone, it is a way of honoring the image of God, which we as human beings bear. And I mean that pattern, for example, in this drawing, this pattern for censing the altar, it's just a form that became widespread, I guess, following the Reformation. To what extent it was used at the Reformation time, we don't know.
I mean, there's some symbolism in the numbers sometimes.
Yeah.
Like at the Eucharist, no elements, right?
Oh, yes, and that's, yeah.
There's got to be, what's the point of that? What does it matter?
It doesn't,
Nothing?
well, 3 is a holy number in Christianity. I mean, it's hard to say, well, why then are 3 crosses made over the bread and wine after the offertory? And then let's see, it's twice counterclockwise and once clockwise over the bread and wine.
I guess what I was wondering is, I wanted to simplify it. If you wanted to bring incense in, you wanted to simplify it. What would be the principles that you would use? Like, I don't maybe I'm thinking, I don't know all these circles.
Yeah. Well, I think I would strive for simplicity. I would strive for simplicity, and if you don't, for example, now the censing of the bread and wine at the offertory, we do know, in fact, that was still being done in the Magdeburg Cathedral in the early 17th century. That we do know, the Lutheran Cathedral in Magdeburg. After the bread and wine were put on the altar, the celebrant did cense the bread and wine. Now, whether he did it that way or not, we don't know. But I mean, you could make one sign of the cross in one circle. It would not be a sin. But I think in introducing incense into the usage of the church, I think I would strive for simplicity at the beginning.
What would you say is the chief ceremony in the use? After censing at the altar, what's the main ceremony?
Incensing the altar?
Yeah.
Well, I would just say it's censing the altar. With a freestanding altar like this, it's very simple to do. You simply walk around it.
Walking around it for a freestanding altar would be that the essence of it?
Yeah, and that's what's done throughout Western Christendom today. Where there's a freestanding altar, you simply walk around it swinging the censer.
And if there's a altar up against the wall, walking back and forth?
Yeah, well, I think I don't know precisely what to suggest. Actually, the the pattern here, once you know it, and it really, you have to, and another thing is to avoid being ostentatious about it, you know. I mean, small swings, don't, be. Well, two things we know for sure about incense are that in Luther's Formula Missae of 1523, when he's going through the order, what to do, after the gradual and sequence hymn, he says, "Here follows the gospel where we prohibit neither candles nor censing." So there is a reference to censing in the Formula Missae. There is the Magdeburg Cathedral. There's also, if that book, is it called Faith and Action? Faith and Act. In there are some descriptions of the various ecclesiastical objects that Lutheran churches had. And one of the objects that turns up in the records is a censer. So if they had a censer, it certainly indicates that, incense was probably used. But I think what you said initially about the influence of the Reformed, Calvinism, Pietism, the Enlightenment, Unionism, all of that destroyed the continuity of worship traditions. And what happened was that the living memory was lost. And I suspect this is part of what Groff's book, The History of the Dissolution of the Worship Practices, would document. Could you say something about that, Father?
Yeah, Groff's book goes through and describes the liturgy as it was practiced in various places and shows how changes were made to it here and there to simplify or make it more didactic, and ended up gutting it as time went on. I'm pretty sure he says something about incense, but I cannot remember what it was.
Yes, I assume the Fort Wayne Seminary has that book in its collection, and if so, I'm going to try to borrow it and do some reading in it. Yes.
You had referenced that one of the primary symbolic functions of incensing the altar was as honorific.
Yes.
Would you also say that there's an element of symbolism of purification?
Yes.
That's taking one step further, the sanctification of sacred space.
Yes.
That you're doing a symbolic action to say that this space,
Yes.
this altar,
Yes. Yeah.
these participants and we, the congregation, are symbolically sanctified for the action that you're about to partake.
Yes, absolutely. I hope you all heard that. And I mean, I think ceremonials have levels and levels and levels of meaning. Yes.
I wanted to mention, you've talked about getting to know the liturgy at the eve of the Reformation. There's a Facebook group, and Matthew Carver is very much involved with it, and it's called Germany's Liturgies and Uses, AD 800 to 1530.
Oh, that's marvelous.
And up there, I've posted it was a couple months ago, but I posted links to scanned editions of missals and liturgies from various different cities in Germany from, around 1500 through to about 1517.
And that is up on the internet.
Yeah, so that's up at Facebook. It's called Germany's Liturgies and Uses, AD 800
Well,
1530.
well, there you are. That would be very useful to get some sense of what. Yes, George?
Is there ever any adornment of this with music or some other auditory?
Oh, yes. I mean, the censing of the altar at the introit. The introit is sung. We saw that this morning. And then at the offertory, there usually is music going on. Oh, yes, definitely. Yes, Father David?
When would a congregation pray solemn vespers, and why should they?
Okay, solemn vespers, I mean, basically what it is, it's a festal form of vespers. That's what it is. Solemn vespers is festal vespers. And certainly every festival of the church year, and really every Sunday. In some of the Liturgical Society of St. James parishes, such as St. Faith's Church in Cleveland, where F.R. Weber was pastor, and St. John's in Hoboken, they had solemn vespers on Sundays. I mean, that was in the days when people came to church on Sunday evening. Now we're lucky if we get them on Sunday morning. But I would make one suggestion. The use of incense at the gospel is very ancient. We know that, and Luther mentions it. And so the incense then, it's a way of honoring the word of God, because after the deacon or whoever reads the gospel announces it, he censes the book, middle, left, right. And that is honoring God's word written. And the other thing is that at the words, therefore with angels and archangels, with all the company of heaven, the thurifer can come into the chancel and kneel down. And then at each of the elevations, 3 double swings toward the host and the cup, a way of acknowledging the real presence. When I was a student at Bronxville, I attended St. John's Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod in Brooklyn, and Richard Klopp was pastor there then. And every Sunday, we would use incense at the gospel and at the consecration. And then on great feast days, we'd use it at the introit and the offertory. And yes.
With respect to the auditory question that George had asked, a few years ago at a Higher Things gathering,
Yes.
the pastor who was censing the altar and the people, there was a lot of clanging. And he was asked about that, and he said it was intentional. He didn't know what the reason for it was, other than that when he had observed it, they intentionally had the chain or the ring at the end clanging against it. And he thought it was perhaps an auditory thing to go with the visual and the olfactory. Is there any substance to making it intentionally clang?
I think it's just something that happens. However you handle it, it can. Now, of course, those of you who are familiar with Eastern Orthodox usage know that their censers often have bells on them. And so when in the Orthodox Church, the deacon or the priest goes around censing, the bells are ringing too. And I think there are some Lutherans who do that too. I mean, all of these ceremonial things are, you really can't say something is right and wrong.
I was just wondering whether there was any
I don't
reasoning that was available.
No, I've never heard any reason for the clanking of the chains of the censer. One Anglican practice that is very dangerous, and if you've ever been to a solemn procession in an Anglican church, sometimes the thurifer will do a complete circle with the thurible. That is extremely dangerous and silly. That's ostentatious and silly. I don't know. But it is curious. I mean, I suppose incense is the most difficult ceremonial thing to reintroduce in our churches, and yet when you look at it, it's really one of the most biblical ceremonials we have. And of course, the story goes that some lady was complaining to her pastor about the introduction of incense in the church, and the pastor said to her, well, my dear, in the life to come, you have a choice of 2 smells, incense or fire and brimstone. So